you. God bless you. God bless you. As previously stated, in recognition of this being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we have with us, is going to lead this discussion, Matthew Kelly. He's married to Leanne Kelly. They have 2 sons and a grandson who's 7 years old and a granddaughter who's 4. Matthew retired from the U.S. Army in March of 2019. He spent 15 years of his 20 years of service at Fort Liberty with the 82nd Airborne Division. His last 3 years on active duty, he was the Sexual Assault Response Coordinator for the 82nd Airborne Division Artillery. So you was over there when the houses are shaking. That was y'all over there. Okay, all right. Matthew has been working in this field for the last 7 years and currently works with an organization known as the Phoenix Center. Will you put your hands together and receive him as he comes to lead us in this discussion? First of all, I want to acknowledge the seriousness of this discussion. I know that there are many of us that for one reason or another have been affected by domestic violence, either personally or somebody that we were close to, family members, friends. So it is my prayer that this conversation in one way or another help someone. And if that conversation does this, we talked about that earlier, Matthew, if that conversation does it, then we've done what the Lord has required of us in this moment. Matter of fact, will you join me in prayer? God, in this endeavor, have your way. Through this conversation, through what we lift and discuss, somehow, some way, God, use this as a blessing to someone. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Matthew, thank you for being with us, sir.
My pleasure to be here tonight to speak to y'all. Stray words hit somebody and able to learn something and maybe be able to pass something on. A family member that maybe.
So let's start our conversation here. Are there any red flags that we could teach our teens, just people in general? Are there any red flags that we could teach people to recognize in abusive relationships? Or to say it another way, what are the early signs of abusive behavior in individuals?
Well, there's tons of different red flags. Individually, they're not so harmful by themselves, but when you put them together, they accumulate somebody who wants to basically control somebody. A lot of those red flags, maybe initially when you start dating somebody, you want to spend a lot of time together, and that's normal, right? But when you get that where they want to spend time with you and they don't want you spending time with your other friends or families, they're trying to control you. They want to know where you are, what you're wearing. They want to try and have you linked into them to where they can, if they don't know where you are, they can pull you up on their phone and they can see your exact location. Things like they may just pop up unannounced at some place where they shouldn't even know that you're there. But they pop up as a surprise and they try and disguise it by saying that they were concerned about you, or they're just showing up to surprise you and make sure you're all right.
So, I know one of the things one of the first things you mentioned there was an attempt at isolation.
Yes.
So they want to. Is there a method to that isolation of why an abuser will want to isolate someone?
Well, with abuse, it's all about power and control, right? So if I can isolate you, I can control you more, right? If I isolate who I'm allowing you to be around, then I can control the type of environment you're in. And by controlling you, I'm able to succeed at having you do what I want when I want, and when you don't, there's consequences, as they say, for you getting hit, whether it be, and in domestic abuse, physical abuse is just one of many different aspects of abuse. You've got psychological abuse, you got emotional abuse, you got that isolation where they, so much more than just friends and family that they keep them from, but wanting them to, whether it not work and stay home, they're controlling the money. They're not allowing them to get the things that they need, and they're always throwing it back at them and basically saying that, putting the fault on the victim of the abuse.
So there's that element of isolation, because if I isolate you, like you said, you have to depend on me. You don't have outside people to kind of talk reason to you, or even for you to fall back on to let you know that they're there for you. Because if you don't know somebody is there for you, then you may feel like you're the only person I have, therefore I can't go anywhere or do anything because I'm now totally dependent on you.
That is correct. So my advice is, if you know anybody that you think may be going through something with isolation, is trying to stay in contact with them, letting them, not looking for details as far as asking them what's going on, but letting them know that you're there, asking them if they can meet, maybe to go out and have lunch and talk. Just constantly letting them know that there is somebody out there that cares about them and is willing to help them, and be willing to ask what they need. Because a lot of times, like I said, they will keep money from them, not allow them to use or have access to finances, or when they do, they berate them about what they're spending the money on.
I was speaking with someone today, and they said something that really stood out to me, that physical abuse is often not the starting point. That sometimes it is precluded by either, like you said, psychological or emotional abuse. So before any, in general, I guess, before any physical abuse starts, and I know every case is going to be different, but does there seem to be a pattern of something outside of physical abuse before physical abuse gets there, like emotional or psychological?
Yeah, physical abuse is just one of many. It's not the first one that happens. Usually married couples argue, right? We don't see eye to eye on some things. We disagree,
sometimes, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's all in the actions and how you communicate with one another, right? And the emotional abuse is where it comes in. The name calling, the belittling, those things. It's domestic violence can go from 0 to 100 just like that. It can go from nothing to name callings to a beating. But yeah, it normally doesn't just start off with that. And when people get into a relationship with somebody, they don't start that way. They don't portray themselves as being controlling, trying to isolate. It's the perfect person, whether it be a guy or a gal, because we know that domestic violence happens to everybody, whether they're a male or female. It doesn't matter.
I was also introduced to a term, love bombing, that they just overwhelm you with loving things to kind of dismantle your um, your guard, to
Yeah.
have you get your guard down, and then after they've done that, then you're more vulnerable to the abuse, which seems like a difficult thing to kind of navigate, because how can you really tell what somebody's intentions or actual love and when somebody's trying to set you up for abuse? And I guess that's why that emotional, psychological piece is harder to distinguish.
Yeah, most definitely. It is harder as an outsider to see emotional abuse happening to somebody, because a lot of times that abuse isn't going on in public, in a public setting. More often than not, that is happening in the privacy of a home, a car, somewhere where there's nobody else around to see and identify that.
That segues us into our next part of this conversation really, really well. Because the next question I want to ask you is, when a family member is the abuser, what steps can other family members take to stop or prevent future acts of violence? And the reason I say that segues us right into that conversation, because sometimes the abuser can be beloved by somebody's family because they have been so good at putting up false pretenses of who they pretend to be, but behind closed doors, there's somebody much different. So if I am a family member and I see or suspect one of my loved ones or family members are in the process of being abused, how can I even approach that? Because it can be a very sensitive issue, getting into other people's relationship woes, and
Yeah.
or in this case, domestic violence woes.
Yeah, so it's called the 3 R's. It's recognize, respond, and refer. First, you got to recognize that it's going on, right? So once you recognize it, what are you going to do about it? And that response is going to be tailored to what you're seeing happen, right? Or what they're telling you is happening. Obviously, if you're walking in and you see someone getting beat up, you're going to intervene if you can do so safely. You don't want to intervene and end up becoming a victim and ending up dead, because ultimately that's where domestic violence can end up, and it's a staggering amount of people that end there. And as far as refer, so it's referring that individual, knowing the organizations in your local community that are here to help victims of domestic violence, like the Phoenix Center. There's also the Care Center, who maintain a shelter, a domestic violence shelter here in Cumberland County. Doesn't always have beds available, but there's ways to get out there. But knowing that information, and the Phoenix Center, we maintain a 24/7 crisis line that is answered for victims to be able to call just to get advice, or if they're having anxiety, they can't sleep, they need to talk to somebody, we're there to talk to them, doesn't matter what time. And then usually a staff member, if they'd like a follow-up call, a staff member will do a follow-up call the next day when we get the notes in from on-call, and kind of go from there. But being able to refer them to the right agencies, giving them that information. And one of the key things with domestic violence is, like, a lot of these domestic violence events that they go through, I will tell you that 90% of the time or more, that first event, they don't leave. And you can't hold that against them. There's so many different reasons why victims stay in those abusive relationships. And we talked about the isolation. They may have kids. They don't have access to funds. They don't know, they're not going to leave their kids with an abuser, because if I leave them, I'm not there. He's gonna beat on the kids, and I don't want that. So it's about being able to help them and get them out of that situation.
There is, like you said, a multitude of things that can keep people in an abusive relationship. As you said, finances, children, embarrassment that they don't want anybody to know. It is just so many things that can keep somebody in a abusive relationship. That's why the question, that we were able to preface here was, as a family member, you're really limited by what you can do, because it has to be the individual that decides they want to change the circumstances and change what's happening. Until that happens, I guess the best a family member can do is just try to be present when and where and how they can, and offer up those resources like you mentioned.
Yep, and support them. And I tell victims all the time that come in that I'm here to help you navigate this however you want to navigate. I can show you your options of staying in. We can go over how to stay safe while you're staying in a relationship like that, because some people just aren't ready, but they're tired of getting beat up, but they're not ready to leave that person, because they think in the back of their mind they're remembering the honeymoon phase of their relationship where everything was great and perfect, and being showered with gifts, and the love bombing, which is also part of being showered with gifts.
One thing I'll mention before we move to our next question is, there is at times a level of shame that comes in, so they don't want to tell anyone in their family. But if you are being abused, if you are in an abusive relationship, I want you to know it's not your fault, and that help is available. And you'd be surprised. One of the things that I've come to realize is, once you are transparent about some things like that, you'd be amazed at how many people have the same situation they have survived and navigated through, and just didn't mention because they didn't know that you were in similar circumstances or situations. So if you are in that circumstance, please don't keep it to yourself. There are other people that have already navigated the difficulty of that situation that are there to love you through it. They are there to pray with you through it. And they are there to be supportive through it. And I believe that's what we've been talking about. I need to ask the next question, unless there was something on that you wanted to mention.
Just the one other thing. The part of that question was how family members could stop domestic violence. You can't. The only way to stop that loved one from going through that domestic violence is helping them get away from that abuser and stay away from that abuser. And it's really hard, especially when they have kids together.
You're segueing me right into the next question. It's almost like we practice this.
It's the man upstairs, I tell you.
Because my next question is, how does witnessing domestic violence in their home affect children?
Okay, I'm going to start with a little stat that I looked up on this one. 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence. And intimate partner violence, those of you that don't know, is just another word for domestic violence.
What was that term again?
They're exposed to that each year, and 90% of those children are eyewitnesses to the violence.
Did you say 90%?
90% of those children are eyewitnesses to the violence. So, things that children can end up having when they're stuck in a family where that abuse is going on and they're seeing it, or they don't even have to see it, they can be in another room and hear the screaming and hooting and hollering going on, right? So things that they end up with, they can end up with anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, aggressive behaviors, because that's what they're learning, right? Depression, and a range of emotions that they have yet to learn about, let alone know how to deal with. So they're trying to learn that. But the way it can affect them is, I will say, not everybody who grows up in an abusive household becomes an abuser. but the likelihood of that being what you think is normal, that's the way you grew up. We hear it all the time, right? And those that don't grow up in houses like that, but live in a community where there's a lot of violence, where they're seeing a lot of violence, whether it be violence on TV, violence in the video games, social media, all those different aspects kind of help groom children into what they become. So as parents, I think it's important that we let them know these things, that that's not normal if you're in that things are going to be okay. It's not their fault.
There's so much as a parent when you have children that you have to be cognizant of what the language is that you use in the house, what you present as normal, how the man and the woman in the house. And the reason I say the man and the woman because sometimes the abuser may not be the father of the children, but he's the male in the household, or because abuse does go both ways, she's the female of the household. And the children see this pattern of behavior. It can, as you stated, it can affect their behavior at school. It can change the norm that they approach their own relationships with, and it can set a pattern that they themselves have to break when they are adults. But it is possible, just like you said, to experience those things and it not become a norm. But I do think it is very important for people that are in abusive relationships to understand that even if that person never puts his hands or her hands on your children, there is still an effect that is happening with your children.
Oh yeah, it's most definitely. I mean, you don't have to physically abuse a child for a child to be a victim of domestic violence. Just being in a household, seeing that go on. And like I said, 90% of the kids that are in a house like that actually witness the domestic violence events. So they're seeing it. And that's where I think a lot of the anxiety, maybe the post-traumatic stress disorder or depression come from.
Sometimes the hope of a happy home can override the reality of a broken home.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that again. Sometimes the hope of a happy home can override the reality of the broken home, because you want so bad for it to work, we get an idea of what our family will be, that the people that we have had a child with or that we've fallen in love with is going to be that person, that good person that we've seen glimpses of, that loving person that we've seen glimpses of, sometimes to the point where that hope has continually put us in position to continue to be abused.
Definitely.
Next question.
Okay. Gotcha.
Because we wanted to also discuss a little bit about the abuser as well. We talked about the person who was being abused. Now I wanted to shift focus a little bit to the person who's doing the abusing. Does the stigma of being labeled as an abuser prevent the abuser from seeking help to change their behavior?
No. It's at least there hasn't been any studies for abusers that are women, but with men abusers, and I want to make sure I get this right, so I'm gonna read it to y'all as far as reasons why they decide not to seek help. They acceptance of violence. A man who thinks that he's entitled to dominate family members and that it's okay to solve problems with violence may not believe that he needs help. He may blame the victim for provoking his behavior. Another is notions of masculinity. For many men, the idea of what it means to be a man includes silence and strength. A man may avoid seeking help because he doesn't want to look weak or feminine. And then fear. Fear is another one. Feelings of shame can prevent men from seeking help. So those are the big reasons why they don't seek help for it. Sometimes there is an abuser training program here in Cumberland County. And
What does that do, the abuser training program?
well, so when it comes to domestic violence, sometimes the courts get involved, and sometimes they will be ordered to attend abuser training to try to basically learn why they're doing what they're doing and to see if there's a way out for them. But I don't know that it's actively still going on. I know 2 years ago it was up and running, and I knew of maybe 4 or 5 abusers that repeat abusers constantly in the court system for criminal charges for assault on a female or breaking and entering.
I'm curious. This was really one of the more fascinating questions that was submitted for our conversation. Do you, from your experience, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this, I guess I'll just read it. Does the abuser, let me see, does the abuser recognize their behavior is wrong? And like they just don't care because do they even recognize it's wrong?
I'm not an abuser myself, so I mean.
No, that's why I said from your years of experience of working with.
I will say from my experience in working with victims, they don't think what they're doing is wrong. It's not so much about whether they're right or wrong. I keep going back to power and control. It's all about them being able to maintain that power and control. So as far as I think anybody knows that physically assaulting somebody, especially somebody that you love, or you're supposed to say you love, is wrong, right? Regardless of what somebody says, we don't put our hands on anybody. And I think that's basic common values that's instilled in everybody. It's just a matter of what they're learning growing up. But I don't believe that or I guess I could say that they probably don't care.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good assessment, Matthew. Perhaps don't think about whether they're right or wrong because they don't care whether they're right or wrong. It is about the power. It is about the control and the other myriad of elements that we've already discussed that contribute to someone even developing that behavior. Mm-hmm. I believe I got one last question before we. Actually, no. That's all of the questions.
That's it.
So all of the questions that we'll cover for today. Is there anything that you would like to add to this conversation before we finish?
I would just like everybody here. The Phoenix Center. I'd like to give you all the phone number. Absolutely. For the 24/7 crisis line. That number is 910-475-7273. We are located at 519 Ramsey Street, right near downtown area. We're open Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. We are more than happy if somebody wants to come in and just sit down and talk with us. If they need to file a police report for something, we can help assist them in that by contacting law enforcement, having them come out. If they don't want that, that's fine. If they want to, our office, we can also help them file for a domestic violence protective order from our office without having to go to the courthouse initially. We have a support group that meets every other Wednesday. It's actually meeting tonight for victims of domestic violence as well as victims of sexual assault or rape. But we're here, we're eager to help. And those that call the crisis line, you can identify yourself if you want, or if you can remain anonymous if you just want information and don't want to call back. But yeah, that's pretty much what I want to share. It's domestic violence is rampant here in our community, and the only way we can lower those numbers is to, when we see it, to actually say something to that individual that we know. Maybe not so much in front of the abuser, but offline in a conversation. And thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
Matthew, it has been a pleasure, and I thank you for coming for this discussion. One of the things that you mentioned to me that I do want to reiterate is that your building is just an anonymous building. It doesn't have signage out front.
Yes.
So anyone that goes in, there's no sign out front that says, this is where people go because of the situational circumstance they're in. Because like I said, there can be a multitude of reasons why somebody doesn't go. So I just wanted to make sure that people understand that those that are here in Fayetteville that can that need this help and this support, when they go to this building, there's no sign on the outside. There's no signage. It is anonymous. You can go in and you can be discreet. It can be handled as discreetly as you need it to be handled, but there is help. So if you just one more time, if you can, give us that phone number, because people watch us from all over the world in the United States, but also that address so that people in this area that need to go to that building, they might be looking for a sign. You're not going to find it by a sign. You'll find it by the address. Yep. So if you could just give us that phone number and that address one more time, please.
Okay, sure. The phone number is 910-475-7273, and the address is 519 Ramsey Street, right near downtown. If you've ever heard of the old Regency Inn Hotel, we're a big white, like 3-story house, old house, right next to the Regency Inn Hotel.
Matthew, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone stand to your feet. We're going to receive our benediction. Lewis Chapel, thank you for allowing us to have these needed and necessary conversations. On next week, we'll get back to our release series. But thank you so much, Lewis Chapel, for allowing us this space to have hard, tough, sensitive conversations. Because I told you Sunday, we're not here to just shout you on Sunday mornings. We're here to help you where we can, how we can, help our community where we can, how we can, which means we have to be willing to face some hard subjects right in the eye. But there is help. There is help. There is help. There is hope. Our hope is in Jesus, and he is giving us a very present help. So thank you to Matthew. Thank you to the Phoenix Center. Thank you to all of the various organizations that work every day to help not just people that are in abusive situations, but in a multitude of situations where people need help. And if Lewis Chapel can help you, just reach out. We try to partner with as many nonprofit organizations that are doing the good work of helping people as we possibly can. We try to help as many organizations that are helping people. Try to partner with as many organizations as we can that are helping people, because that's what God put us here for. He didn't put us here to have a good time on Sunday mornings, then go home, and then just come back next Sunday or Wednesday, have a good time. We are called to be helpers, aids to the world, because listen, it might not be you, but it might be somebody you love. It might be somebody you love that they know. So we do everything we can, Lewis Chapel, to be a very present help, because that's what God has called us to be. We are blessed to be a blessing. Now, the door of the church is open. Y'all know we wasn't going to leave before we gave somebody a chance to give their life to Christ. The door of God's church is open. My brother and sister, I want you to know God loves you. God loves you. He loves you more than anyone ever can and ever will. Do you know that there is no circumstance or situation that can make God turn his back on you? Did you know that? No matter how much you mess up, God does not walk away from you, but there are some times that the circumstance and situation can make it feel like we need to walk away from God. But I want you to know he loves you, brother. He loves you, sister. And if your soul is not saved, y'all excuse me, I done gone into my preaching voice. If your soul is not saved, y'all know how much I love the opportunity to extend salvation. Because where would I be without the love of Jesus? Oh, you know what? I don't know where I would be, but I know where I wouldn't be. I wouldn't be right here if it wasn't for the grace of the Lord. And I want you to know, my brother and sister, he loves you. And he knocks on the door of your heart. And if you just receive him and say, God, I believe in you. I trust in you. I believe in your son, Jesus. And God, I accept your love into my heart. Save my soul. Sister, he'll save you right where you are. Brother, he'll save you right where you are. And you'll be able to sing that wonderful song, A Wonderful Change Has Come Over Me. Thank you, Brother Harris. That was right on time.